When E Company's commander seemingly panicked and fell apart, his replacement responded to the crisis in the most insane way imaginable. Some consider the miniseries Band of Brothers to be the best World War II depiction on TV, if not the best TV series, period. There's a good reason for this, as just like the book of the same name, the story comes from the true experiences of E Company, also known as Easy Company. As the story depicts, this paratrooper unit overcame the most grueling and insurmountable challenges, significantly impacting the tide of World War II and saving many lives. A million stories of great valor and brutality came out of World War II, often going hand in hand, and the exploits of E Company were no different. However, even the most famous units all started in the same place as this one, in basic training. Established in 1942 at Camp Toccoa, Georgia, and commanded by First Lieutenant Herbert Sobel, Easy Company was in the 2nd Battalion of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division. While Sobel may have been the right choice, he sure was tough. To say Sobel put his unit through the ringer would be an understatement. Even before they trained as paratroopers, Sobel's rigorous and reportedly tyrannical drills turned his unit into some of the most physically fit servicemen, albeit bitter ones. In fact, the company ended up skipping their physical training at jump school, as they were already in such good shape. Following this, they spent a lot of time in preparation. After completing their training in Georgia, E Company shipped off across the pond and posted up in Wiltshire, England in late 1943. By then, the planning for Operation Overlord was already underway, and the Allied forces were readying their men and resources to invade Normandy. As such, E Company spent most of its time waiting for the operation. During this time, though, concerns began to bubble at the surface. Just below Sobel was 2nd Lieutenant Richard Winters, who began to worry whether his superior was up to the task. Beyond Sobel's tendency to harshly discipline the men at the drop of a hat, Winters had concerns about his leadership. While Sobel was a strong training officer, several issues, such as poor decision-making, didn't inspire much confidence. He wasn't alone in this thinking either. Naturally, Sobel's domineering leadership tactics only earned him hatred from his men. This disdain grew to a point where not only did Winters wonder if the first lieutenant would be trustworthy in battle, but the other men did as well. Not to mention that many of the men in E Company openly preferred Winters' command. Of course, Sobel wasn't too happy about this. The rough dynamic between Sobel and Winters was hard to ignore, and eventually, Sobel decided to do something about it. After Winters neglected to carry out Sobel's orders for latrine inspection, Sobel unnecessarily escalated the conflict, bringing up the 2nd Lieutenant on a charge of failure to carry out lawful order. Winters wasn't about to just let this go, though. Winters knew that Sobel had it out for him and believed the severity of the discipline handed to him was unjust. Therefore, he escalated the problem further and requested that a court-martial review the charge. As a result, Battalion Commander Major Robert L. Strayer decided to set the issue aside. However, Sobel remained unsatisfied. With the charge being set aside, Sobel could have left the tense situation alone and continued professionally. However, the bitterness between the two officers was too strong, and Sobel filed another charge against Winters the very next day. Due to this, Winters got a bit of distance during the investigation as he transferred to the headquarters company. Thankfully, Winters had his loyal supporters. The hatred of Sobel among Easy Company's men and their support of Winters didn't go unnoticed as the investigation into the charge went on. As it happened, a small group of the unit's non-commissioned officers came up with a shocking ultimatum. They threatened to resign if the higher-ups did not replace Sobel with a new commander. While this loyalty was admirable, not everyone viewed it that way. Although many believed the threat made by the NCOs was justified, it still amounted to an attempted mutiny. 2 platoon sergeants led this decision, and as such, the man who received this ultimatum, Colonel Robert Sink, punished them accordingly. He demoted Terrence Harris and Myron Ranney to privates and assigned them to other companies. Still, he had heard their concerns. While he couldn't stand for the actions of E Company's NCOs, Colonel Sink also couldn't ignore the unit's major leadership problem. The men weren't shy about their complaints, and Sobel's exaggerated charges against Winters did nothing to improve his reputation. So Sink transferred Sobel to a command position at a new airborne school in England. This eliminated the tense dynamic among the company's lieutenants. Ultimately, as with the first time, Sobel's second charge against Winters didn't go much further than its investigation. Colonel Sink set the court-martial aside and allowed Winters to return to Easy Company, where he resumed his position as a lieutenant. Even through all this, Winters couldn't deny Sobel's impact. Although the animosity between Winters and Sobel was clear, according to Winters, it was much more one-sided than it appeared. He would later speak about how he never considered himself in competition with Sobel and actually credited much of Easy Company's success to the rigorous training the first lieutenant had put them through. While Winters' humility and leadership earned him respect, he didn't receive command initially. Winters was back with his unit, but despite the respect and admiration the other man had for him, he was not granted command of it. In February 1944, as a replacement for Sobel, First Lieutenant Thomas Meehan joined E Company as its new commander. Following their transfer out of Easy Company, former NCOs Harris and Raney became Pathfinders. This meant they would be among the first on the ground during the Normandy invasion, which Raney wasn't happy with. Just 5 days before the mission, thanks to his writing to Winters and asking to return, Raney transferred back to E Company. But perhaps if he knew the horror that awaited him, he might not have been so eager. E Company had an integral part to play in the larger scope of Operation Overlord. The Allied forces chose a route near Utah Beach for the men arriving by boat, referring to it as Causeway 2. A few hours before the invasion, E Company's job was to land in the area, eliminate any obstacles, and take its entrances. Of course, some men didn't take the planning as seriously. First Lieutenant Meehan helmed much of the planning for E Company's mission with 3 other senior officers. One such officer, Sergeant Carwood Lipton, would later divulge that while he and the others spent the day before the invasion agonizing over battle plans and possible situations, the men of Easy Company did something quite surprising. They went to the movies. Finally, it was time to launch. Prepared to launch the invasion, E Company separated into several groups, or sticks, before boarding their respective planes. The higher-ups that formed E Company's headquarters section, including Meehan, received assignments to plane number 66 and embarked on their mission. Unfortunately, that's when everything took a turn. Arriving ahead of the Allied amphibious invasion, Plane 66 flew at the front of a diamond formation of 3 other planes. Horrifically, their formation broke when anti-aircraft fire over France hit number 66, causing the plane to collide with a hedgerow. A devastating explosion followed, and tragically, there were no survivors. Fortunately, the other planes were more successful. The 3 other aircrafts in Plane 66 formation carried several other company members, one of whom witnessed the crash firsthand. After jumping out of Plane 69, Easy Company's 2nd platoon member Ed Mauser had his perspective turned around when the forces of the plane's propeller blasted him in the face, causing intense whiplash but giving him a chilling view of Plane 66's sad fate. This unfortunate event led to a change in leadership. Despite not witnessing the plane crash and therefore not knowing that First Lieutenant Meehan had perished, Winters knew his superiors were at least missing. As the highest-ranking officer present, he took command of Easy Company as they gathered and pushed forward into Causeway 2. Then they proceeded with the mission. D-Day was underway, and amid the chaos of everything, Winters had become the de facto leader of his unit and received Easy Company's next order. Given the simple statement of "there's fire along that hedgerow there, take care of it," Winters and his company targeted a nearby German battery and disabled 4 pieces of heavy artillery. Of course, they faced stiff opposition. Next up on the docket was for the Allies to overtake the town of Carentan, which would allow the Allies to transport supplies between Utah and Omaha Beach. Of course, the German forces weren't ignorant of this tactical advantage, so they made the town's defense one of their top priorities. Naturally, the Allies ran into some stressful issues. Beginning 4 days after D-Day, the Battle of Carentan lasted from June 10th to the 14th, during which E Company's advance on the town slowed due to a deadly ambush. Having made serious headway in their mission, E Company and 2 others were heading southwest outside Carentan on June 12th when enemy fire stopped them in their tracks. All of a sudden, things got worse. E Company and its allies scrambled to defend against the German surprise attack, something which soon became all the more difficult. Joining the fire of the enemy squads, the companies then had to deal with the added tank and mortar barrages. However, all they could do initially was dive for cover. Though this reportedly didn't last long, the attack's brevity didn't make it any less nightmarish. The Germans hit the advancing companies hard and fast, but by the end of the day, Easy Company and its allies outlasted them. They had captured Carentan and paid for it dearly, with the cacophony of screams and artillery quickly replaced by the moans and groans of their wounded men, as Sergeant Donald Malarkey would later write. Even then, E Company wasn't one to be messed with. By June 13th, Allied forces had captured Carentan, but the battle wasn't over yet. The Germans launched a counterattack, breaking through the Allied lines, including the Dog and Fox companies, who initially traveled with Easy Company. However, E Company's defense held, stalling long enough for American tanks to arrive and drive the enemy off for good. But this didn't come without a high price. Strengthening the reputation of Winter's admirable leadership, he wasn't the type to send his men into danger while he stayed behind. This became evident by the end of the battle when he hadn't emerged unscathed, having been injured by a ricocheted projectile shard to his right leg. Of course, others had it much worse. Through the chaos of D-Day and the subsequent Battle of Carentan, E Company sustained a significant hit. Ultimately, by the time the unit came back, the final count had 74 of its original 139 men still alive and well. Of the 65 casualties, 22 men had perished in action, and 43 were left wounded. However, before long, they were back in the thick of it. In the fall of 1944, the ultimately failed Operation Market Garden led to several engagements as the Allies tried to break Germany's hold in the Netherlands. One occurred in the area of the Lower Rhine rivers, where Easy Company and its allies stood in the way of two German companies and forced them to retreat. Fortunately, the higher-ups recognized their achievements. Although the two routed German companies later revealed themselves as part of a diversion, E Company still successfully pushed back an enemy force of 300 men. To commemorate their daring act and skillful maneuver against a numerically superior force, Colonel Robert Sink issued a citation for their gallantry in action. Their exploits didn't stop there, though. Also, as part of Operation Market Garden, the Battle of Arnhem occurred in September 1944, at the end of which the Allies lost. This resulted in thousands of British and Polish paratroopers being captured, while over 100 remained stranded and in hiding behind German lines. The following month, the Allies devised Operation Pegasus to rescue them. Unfortunately, they had to do so under the cover of darkness. After crossing the Lower Rhine on October 22nd and meeting up with the stranded men after nightfall, a group of Royal Engineers and American paratroopers brought them back to the river for extraction. Despite them being several hundred meters upriver, a patrol of Easy Company men and engineers spotted their V-shaped torch signal, launching their boats immediately. It was mostly successful. After 20 minutes, E Company reached the enemy side of the river and headed upstream. There, they met the group of escapees, now including several Dutch civilians and a group of turncoat Russian men. E Company helped nearly everyone evacuate across the Lower Rhine, except for one Russian man who the Germans unfortunately captured. Still, their most miserable battle was yet to come. In what was America's largest and bloodiest single battle in World War II, the Battle of the Bulge lasted from December 16, 1944, to January 28, 1945. Initiated when Germany launched its final major Western Front offensive, they took the Allies by surprise, now spread out between Belgium and Luxembourg. Of course, they didn't account for such strong resistance. To reach the roads integral to their campaign's success, German forces advanced near the village of Bastogne. Fortunately, Easy Company was in the area and received orders to hold their position and halt the enemy's progress. Despite their diminished food, ammo, and warm clothes, they did not falter. When the time came, E Company went on the offensive themselves. A month later, the Allies had already proven that Germany was on the losing end of their campaign. E Company received orders for the next step in the Allied counterattack, capturing the nearby town of Foy, Belgium. This effort was under new leadership. Under new command by Lieutenant Norman Dyke, Easy Company began its assault on Foy at 9 a.m. As the rest of the unit advanced, Dyke ordered the 1st Platoon to head left. Unfortunately, seeing as the 1st Platoon had no radio, Dyke couldn't communicate with them without yelling for them to come back. Then, things started to fall apart. While the 1st Platoon separated from the pack, the rest of Easy Company tried to advance upon the town until they came under heavy fire from the Germans. Lieutenant Dyke then ordered his men to stop and take cover, which might have been a good decision if there had actually been any substantial cover around them. Of course, his men weren't shy about their objections. Seemingly, everyone in E Company realized that staying put while Germans fired at them was a bad idea, except Lieutenant Dyke. So, his men tried to convince him to continue the advance on Foy, as continuing to take cover, like sitting ducks, would likely lead to all of them quickly losing their lives. It wasn't just them who felt this way. The lack of progress during E Company's assault on Foy got the attention of Winters, who, although not in the middle of the battle, was now acting battalion commanding officer. Validating the protest from the other men, he immediately contacted Dyke via radio and ordered him to continue pushing forward. Dyke's response, however, was diabolical. Instead of ordering the rest of E Company to resume their advances as Winters commanded, Dyke called the 1st Platoon back and told them to go around the town and flank it. Following this, he allegedly lost all sense of command or stability. After finding cover, he just shut down, freezing in place. However, according to another witness, he only stopped because he sustained an injury. Regardless of why, they needed a change. Not only was Easy Company now pinned down under German defenses, but 2 other companies were waiting to advance on Foy from different directions. Realizing that Dyke was no longer fit to command the E Company, Winters took him off the front line and replaced him with Ronald Spears. Immediately, he showed his quality, with his actions shocking the enemy. Now, under new leadership and with the men eager to get on with the mission, the other companies needed to know the orders to move into Foy. However, Spears couldn't radio them, so he put his own life on the line. Without hesitation, he ran straight into the town, through the heavy German forces, and met up with the company on the other side. But that wasn't all. After delivering the new orders and risking his life in a seemingly impossible feat, Spears did it again. Sprinting back through the town and German defenses, he returned to Easy Company. As 1st Sergeant Lipton would later state, Spears only survived because the Germans were too stunned by his feat to pull their triggers. Understandably, this action didn't go unnoticed. Showing an incredible ability to keep a level head under pressure and lead by example, 1st Lieutenant Ronald Spears demonstrated that he was a born leader. Following the assault on Foy, his superiors reassigned him as Easy Company's commander, and he continued to hold that position for the duration of World War II. Of course, he wasn't the only one to make a difference. When all the dust and smoke cleared, Easy Company and its allies had driven the Germans out and captured Foy, contributing to the larger victory by the end of the month when the Allies stopped Germany's campaign in the Western Front. Afterwards, they just kept going. Now that the Allies had pushed Germany's offensive back, it was time to take the fight to the enemy. With boosted morale and renewed monument, Easy Company joined the rest of its regiment and advanced into Germany. Ultimately, the 101st Airborne Division, to which Easy Company belonged, received a citation for its actions. As fate would have it, World War II would soon end. As the war neared its completion, E Company didn't go on many missions as dangerous as their previous ones. After a few occupation duty assignments, including Berchtesgaden, where the Führer's Eagle's Nest house was, they bided their time, attending several patrols until 1945, when World War II ended and their regiment disbanded. However, their story still wasn't quite over yet. Following their disbandment, their company's legacy lived on, as its acts of valor received acclaim and respect. But it went even further than that. Almost a decade later, in 1954, the Army reactivated Easy Company to be a training unit. More recently, in 2001, the book and series Band of Brothers brought E Company's story into the spotlight, featuring real interviews with the unit's survivors. Thanks for watching History Exposé. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. And don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more amazing facts about everything.